Alright, man, we got football back today. It's Josh over here with the Man Tries. And of course, I'll be doing some DFS videos on the NFL, but this video right here is for the UFC. We got another Fight Night card coming up. It's being headlined by Michelle Waterson and Angela Hill, which I actually think is going to be a pretty exciting 5-round fight. We have been killing it the past 2 weeks. I had another successful week last weekend. Really the only fight that I had some bad analysis on last week was the Fabinski-Muniz fight, which thankfully I did have some Muniz exposure and, you know, cashed in a lot of tournaments despite the fact that that card kind of crumbled. Hopefully that doesn't happen this weekend. Let's start off with the main event here, Angela Hill versus Michelle Waterson. Angela Hill has a record of 12-8. Michelle Waterson 17-8. Michelle Waterson, though, coming off of 2 losses. Tough losses, though, man. She went the distance against Joanna Jędrzejczyk, and she lost a split decision to Carla Esparza. But before that, strung together 3 wins in a row. Victories over Courtney Casey, Felice Herrig, and Karolina Kowalkiewicz. For Angela Hill, she's just been on a tear. I mean, I know her last fight 3 months ago against Claudia Gadelha, she lost that. It was a close fight. I personally probably would have given the nod to Angela Hill in that fight. Before that, victories over Loma Lookboom, Hannah Cyphers, Ariane Carnelosi. You know, she's just been fighting very frequently. This will now be her 5th fight in the past year. So she's really become like the cowboy of the women's strawweight division, which is cool. I like both of these fighters. Both these girls, I don't think they'll ever be, belt holders in the strawweight division, but they're 2 of the more exciting fighters in that division, and 2 girls that I generally like to root for. Looking at the Vegas odds in this fight, Angela Hill is now a slight favorite. Most books have her at about -125. Michelle Waterson, even money or +105, depending on where you're betting. So it's basically a pick'em. I want to break down some of the stats for these 2 fighters. We'll start with Michelle Waterson, 3.31 significant strikes landed per minute, 52% accuracy, 3.79 strikes absorbed, 1.68 takedowns per 15, 50% takedown accuracy, 67% takedown defense. For Angela Hill, 5.76 significant strikes landed per minute, 49% striking accuracy, 5.17 strikes absorbed, 0.47 takedowns per 15, 37% takedown accuracy, 72% takedown defense, which is a really good number for Angela Hill. These fighters are basically the same size. They're both 5'3". Angela Hill's going to have a 2-inch reach advantage. Makes sense. She's a little bit more of a rangy, longer fighter. I think that's why her takedown defense numbers are solid at that 72%. But she also hasn't fought the toughest competition, right? Definitely a UFC veteran at this point, but outside of her last fight against Claudia Gadelha, a lot of the fighters that she's fought in the UFC have just not been top-level talent. In fact, I've been looking at Tapology, doing some research on this fight, and a lot of people like Angela Hill in this fight, and I get it because she's probably the better striker, but I think that's closer than I don't think people are giving Michelle Waterson enough credit for her striking ability. Angela Hill has that Muay Thai background. She really likes to use that jab. She also relies on the Thai clinch when it gets into those clinch positions within the fight. That's another reason why I think she's able to stuff some takedowns, because she's good at controlling the head, which is really important. But to get back to my original thought, who is the best opponent that Angela Hill has beat in the UFC? For me, it's either Jodie Esquibel or Hannah Cifers. I mean, she's got losses to Courtney Casey. It's a common opponent. Michelle Waterson has a victory over her. She lost to Randa Marcos, Xiaonan Yan, and of course Claudia Gadelha. And when I look at Michelle Waterson, she's just faced tougher competition, right? She's fought Esparza, Jędrzejczyk, Kowalkiewicz, Herrig, Courtney Casey, Tisha Torres, Rose Namajunas. So definitely has more experience with fighting against the top level opponents, and I think that's really going to help her in this fight. Now, this is a 5-round fight, which is important to point out because, right, gas tank will definitely come into play. I don't think either of these girls will gas out. If I had to give the stamina edge to one of them, though, it would probably be Angela Hill. This is a fight that I see going one of two ways. So I think this fight could certainly go the distance. And if it does, that means it's going to be a striking match back and forth. And that probably would favor Angela Hill because of her output. If it doesn't go the distance and we do see a finish, then I think we're going to see that finish from Michelle Waterson because she's just the better jiu-jitsu practitioner. And that means she'd be able to take down Angela Hill and potentially submit her. I don't think we're going to see a knockout or a TKO in this one. So when I break down this fight, I think that there are more avenues to a victory for Michelle Waterson than Angela Hill, in all honesty, which is why I really like Michelle Waterson at plus 105 in this fight. Don't be surprised if she's able to take down Angela Hill. I think she could definitely pull off a submission. I think she's just way better on the ground than Angela Hill. I'm going to look at Angela Hill's resume. She was armbarred by Randa Marcos in 2019, so not that long ago. She was rear naked choked by Rose Namajunas. She also was rear naked choked on The Ultimate Fighter to Carla Esparza. So, we've seen her be submitted in the UFC previously. So I like Michelle Waterson here. I really do. When it comes to DraftKings, because this is a 5-round fight, you can have exposure to both of these ladies. Michelle Waterson is priced at $8,000 and Angela Hill's at $8,200. I'm going to have a lot of exposure to Michelle Waterson. In a 5-round fight, she could land. I mean, she's throwing over 3 significant strikes per minute, so you're talking. There's a solid floor there for an 8,000 priced up fighter, where even if she takes a loss, she should be able to cross the 50-point threshold. Angela Hill at 8,200. If she wins this fight by decision, she'll rack up over 100 points. So I'm definitely going to have some lineups where I stack Waterson and Angela Hill. But for the most part, I'm going to have more exposure to Michelle Waterson just because I think there's that potential for a finish. And again, even if she isn't able to sub Angela Hill, she should still have a pretty productive night. So we'll move on to the co-main event, which is a fight between Kama Worthy and Atman Azaitar. This was a fight that was supposed to happen a few weeks ago. It was rescheduled. It's been bumped up to the co-main event on this card. And it's taking place in the lightweight division, 155 pounds. Kama Worthy has been on a nice little win streak here. He's got 2 victories in a row. Both fights he was a dog, and I've been on him in both those fights, and it's going to be hard for me to stray away from him here as well, and I'll explain why, right? So he's got that knockout victory, beautiful victory over Devontae Smith, and then he also subbed Luis Pena with a guillotine choke. For Ottman Azaitar, this will only be his second UFC fight. He is undefeated with a 12-0 record. He was able to knock out Teemu Packalén. It's been about a year. And that was just a devastating overhand right that he landed right on the chin and just took Packalén's lights out. Before that, Ottman fought with Brave, so he fought some decent competition over there, and he's got a ton of finishes on his record. He's a live dog in this fight, and the reason why I say that is because Worthy has been knocked out. But what we have to pay attention to when we're looking at Khama Worthy is he used to fight at 145, which is crazy because he's 5'11", and he's got a 74-inch reach, and he's just absolutely jacked. So the last time that Worthy took a loss was back in 2017 to Kyle Nelson, who actually is on this card as well. And he was finished by him, knocked out in the first round. But since then, it's just been on a crazy winning streak. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 wins. And 5 of those wins he was able to finish. Combination of chokes and striking, because he's got pretty heavy punches. So again, doing lots of research on this fight. Azaitar is probably the more technical striker. But the problem with Azaitar is he's going to be much smaller in the octagon here. Now, he was smaller than Packalén as well, but Teemu Packalén is not really a fighter that should be in the UFC. I mean, Mark Jacasey destroyed him. Azaitar destroyed him. I don't think he's going to have too many more chances in the UFC. I think his time is done. This is definitely going to be a step up in competition for Azaitar. When it comes to the betting odds here, Azaitar actually opened up as the favorite, and a ton of money went pouring in on Khama Worthy. So the odds currently stand Worthy at minus 135, Azaitar plus 115. Hopefully that's smart money that's going on Khama Worthy, because I am trailing it this weekend. I think Khama Worthy is the better overall fighter. I also think that I know he's the bigger fighter. And I think he's probably the toughest competition that Azaitar has faced so far in his professional career. This is a fight that I'm comfortable betting Worthy at minus 135, because I think he can finish Azaitar, which I know we haven't seen. The guy's undefeated. And he can finish him one of two ways. I think he could land a heavy shot, or if this fight goes to the ground. I mean, Worthy has a really nice guillotine choke. We saw that in his last fight against Luis Pena. He also has some decent jiu-jitsu skills, right? So he's got guillotine choke victories, rear naked choke victories on his resume. And because he's a longer fighter, I think he should be able to use that to his advantage if the fight goes to the ground. He should be able to wrap those arms around Azaitar's neck. And, Azaitar's going to want to keep this fight standing. And if it ever gets into a dicey spot for Worthy, he'll have that in his back pocket. That, hey, I can rely on potentially getting this fight to the ground, where he should have a significant advantage when it comes to jiu-jitsu. When it comes to DFS, this is a fight that you have to target, and I would expect that this fight is going to be in the optimal lineup. And these fighters are priced pretty reasonably. Azaitar at 7,700 and Worthy at 8,500. I'm going to have exposure on both sides of this fight. I'll lean Worthy just because I think he is the one that will get it done. And he's really looked good in his past 2 fights. He's put up solid fantasy numbers, 83 points against Pena, 111 against Smith. And again, in both those fights, he was pretty big underdogs. Azaitar put up over 100 points in his only UFC fight when he knocked out Pakalin. This is going to be a litmus test for Azaitar. If he's able to go out there and finish worthy, then he's going to certainly look like a contender in this division. And I guess you could say the same for Worthy as well, since Azaitar is 12-0. So definitely get some exposure to this fight. Like I said, I will be leaning Conor Worthy. So we'll move on to the next fight on the main card here, which is a fight in the flyweight division between Andrea KGB Lee and Roxanne Modafferi, the Happy Warrior. Roxanne Modafferi, veteran in women's MMA, 24-17 record. Andrea Lee, 11-4, but she's coming off of 2 losses. Both of those were tough split decision losses, though, right? So she lost to Joanne Calderwood and Lauren Murphy. Common opponent. Both of these fighters' most recent fights were against Lauren Murphy. Roxanne Modafferi took an L to Lauren Murphy just about 3 months ago. Modafferi does have that really nice victory over Macy Barber. She has victories over Antonina Shevchenko. But she also has a bunch of losses, right? She lost to Sajara Eubanks. She lost to Jennifer Maia, which she's looked really impressive as of late. So this is going to be an interesting one. The odds here, Andrea Lee is -325. Roxanne Modafferi is +265. I don't know if I agree with those odds. I definitely lean Andrea Lee because she's going to have a significant striking advantage. But she doesn't, her takedown defense is at 61%. With Roxanne Modafferi, she's definitely best on the ground, but she's not a great wrestler. She has trouble getting the fight to the ground. In fact, in this fight, I don't think she's going to have success taking Andrea Lee down. Where she may have success is pulling guard, getting into a clinch position and kind of just letting Andrea Lee take her down. Hopefully, Andrea Lee doesn't go to the ground with Modafferi, because as long as she avoids that, she will win this fight just on points. So at -325, I'm not comfortable betting Lee, even though I think she is probably going to win this fight. When it comes to DraftKings, DFS, this is a fight I'm avoiding because I don't expect to finish. Andrea Lee is priced up at 8,900, which is crazy. She's never had more than 97 fantasy points in her UFC career. Generally around the 50 to 75 range. All of her fights have gone the distance thus far. She's a decision merchant. For Roxanne Modafferi, 7,300. She's not a bad dart throw in tournaments because she always has the ability to pull off a submission. We just haven't seen it recently. Again, not a fighter that has a pretty resume when it comes to DFS. 27 points, 90, 15, 22. This isn't a fight that I want to have any exposure to. In fact, I don't know if I'll have any tournament shares of either one of these fighters. Moving along on the main card here, we have a fight in the light heavyweight division versus Ed Herman and Mike Rodriguez. Mike Rodriguez making a quick turnaround here. He just fought 2-3 weeks ago against Marcin Prachnio, and he knocked him out really early in the first round there. Mike Rodriguez is taking this fight on short notice. Ed Herman, the veteran, been around since like the second season of The Ultimate Fighter. Things were looking pretty rough for him. Took quite a few tough losses, and in his past 2 fights has looked good though. He knocked out Patrick Cummins, and he really destroyed Khadis Ibragimov, who stinks, so I don't know what that really means. Ed Herman, 24-14. He's 40 years old at this point, so he's definitely the older fighter. Mike Rodriguez, 11-4, and Mike Rodriguez is boom or bust, man. He's got a lot of finishes on his resume. He's knocked out Adam Milstead, knocked out Marcin Prachnio, but he's also lost fights. He was knocked out by Da Un Jung. Mike Rodriguez has decent submission skills. He's got decent striking skills as well. He's definitely a power puncher. A lot of that has to do with his size. I mean, he is 6'4" and has an 82.5-inch reach, which is solid for that light heavyweight division. The thing that scares me a little bit about Mike Rodriguez is his takedown defense. It's 38%. That number is very scary. Now, Ed Herman is a decent grappler. 2.2 takedowns per 15 minutes, 48% takedown accuracy. So we see the path to victory for Ed Herman, which is to get this fight to the ground. I wouldn't consider Ed Herman to be an elite wrestler, though. And as a result of that, I'm going to lean Mike Rodriguez here. I like Mike Rodriguez. I'm not comfortable betting him at minus 245. And that's because I don't really think either one of these fighters are that great. So this isn't one that I'm going to lay any cash on. But I'll definitely have some exposure to this fight in DraftKings because, again, I'm always chasing guys that can have big performances. And to me, Mike Rodriguez is priced pretty reasonably at 8,800. We've seen him cross that 100-point threshold. I mean, he's had wins over Prochnio, Milstead, Jones, 90, 111, 128, and I think he can get it done here again against Ed Herman. I will say Ed Herman is a tough out, though. He hasn't been finished since 2016. Nikita Krylov head kicked him. He also was knocked out by Derek Brunson. So we've seen Ed Herman be finished in the octagon. He's also been subbed by Jacare, Damian Maia. I mean, those guys are very elite. Jason McDonald. You got to really go back in time when you're breaking down Ed Herman. The thing with Ed Herman is he going to have the gas tank at 40 years old to, if this fight continues on, to wrestle with Mike Rodriguez? I think Ed Herman's best chances in this fight are to get this to the mat early. As that fight goes on, I think Herman's gas tank may start to go on E, and of course these fighters will get sweaty and slippery. It's just harder to grapple in the later rounds. So I like Mike Rodriguez in tournaments at 8,800. I think he's a guy that could finish Ed Herman here. I know Herman's on that nice little 2-fight win streak, but I don't know how much stock I put in the Khadis Ibragimov win. Patrick Cummins' win was solid, but again, he's kind of a middle of the road fighter. I think Mike Rodriguez will definitely be the best striker that Ed Herman has faced since Nikita Krylov, and Nikita Krylov finished him with a head kick. All right, so the last fight, the first fight on the main card, is a fight between Billy Quarantillo versus Kyle Nelson. Kyle the Monster Nelson. This fight is taking place in the featherweight division, 145 pounds. Billy Q, 14-2 record. He's on a nice win streak here. This guy is a Contender Series veteran. And in his first 2 UFC fights, had victories over Jacob Kilburn and Spike Carlyle. And Spike Carlyle looked like a murderer in the UFC, and Billy Quarantillo really just out-grappled him. It was very impressive. For Kyle Nelson, this will be his 4th UFC fight. He's 1-2. Most recently, about a year ago, he knocked out Pollo Reyes. But in his first 2 UFC fights, he was finished by Matt Sales and Diego Fajeda. The thing with Kyle Nelson that I just couldn't get over was that loss to Matt Sales. That's a tough one for Kyle Nelson, and he was subbed in that fight. I think he'll be susceptible to being subbed in this fight against Billy Quarantillo. Billy Quarantillo's got really good wrestling. I want to pull up some of the stats for this fight, particularly in the grappling. Billy Quarantillo, 1.34 takedowns per 15, 42% takedown accuracy, 54% takedown defense. And then when he gets you on the ground, he can really unleash some striking. 7.43 strikes landed per minute, 79% striking accuracy. Those numbers are inflated because a lot of those fight numbers come from when he's on top and he's just raining down strikes. Kyle Nelson does have 50% takedown defense. he's not much of a grappler, and defensively he struggles in the striking department. He absorbs 6.35 strikes per minute. Not a number that I like to see. So as you would suspect, Billy Quarantillo is a big favorite in this fight at minus 250. Kyle Nelson's plus 210. I'm fine with that. I really like Billy Quarantillo in this fight. I don't see how he loses. I mean, it is the UFC. Anything can happen, but I'll be all over Billy Quarantillo in this one, and therefore I'll be all over him in DFS as well. His two fights, 139 against Kilburn, 76 against Carlisle. He is priced up at 9,300, but if you're looking at the other fighters in that price point, Sabina Mazo, Bobby Green, Brian Barberena, Julia Avila, you're probably going to have exposure to one of those fighters. And if you do, I think Billy Quarantillo is your best option. Unless you're really high on Avila, which you could be, but 9,400, female fight, those rarely end in a finish. I just like Billy Quarantillo here at 9,300. Kyle Nelson I'm going to be staying away from. He's priced down at 6,900. I don't even really like him as a tournament play this week. I just don't have any confidence in him. So I will definitely have a ton of exposure to Billy Quarantillo. Not too much exposure to Kyle Nelson. In fact, probably none. I think there's better options in the low sevens than Kyle Nelson. Okay, moving on to our featured prelim, which is a fight that's taking place in the flyweight division between Matt Danger Schnell and Tyson Nam. We'll start off with Matt Schnell, who's got a 14-5 record, coming off of a loss to Alexandre Pantoja, where he was finished in that fight. But before that, put together a string of victories in the UFC. Victories over Marco Beltran, Naoki Inoue, Luis Smolka, Jordan Espinosa. And we all know Matt Schnell. He's got really good BJJ submission skills. That's kind of his game, right? He subbed Espinosa, subbed Smolka. He's a guy that's going to want to take it to the mat and work that BJJ. For Tyson Nam, he's the exact opposite. I mean, this is a guy who's a striker by trade, pretty good Muay Thai skills, 1-2 in the UFC. Took a tough loss to Sergio Pettis, who, Sergio Pettis is an elite fighter, and that was a tough draw for his first UFC fight. Also lost to Kai Kara France. That one went the distance. Kai Kara France is a decent striker. Again, he's another guy with a Muay Thai background. But 3 months ago, he took on Zaruk Adashev. Adashev took that fight on short notice. Nam disposed of him pretty quickly. And this fight is going to be, the odds suggest it should be pretty close. Matt Schnell opened up as a favorite, but this is another one that's kind of swung the other way. Ultimately, it's a pick'em. Schnell's minus 105. Nam is minus 115. I want to talk about a particular statistic in this fight, and that statistic is Tyson Nam's takedown defense. So far in the UFC, it's 100%. Very good takedown defense in 3 UFC fights, and that statistic is what I'm really focusing on when I look at this fight or when I break down this fight, because if this fight stays standing, Nam is definitely going to have the advantage, right? Schnell's path to victory is to get this on the ground, and we haven't seen Nam on the ground yet in the UFC. Not to say that it can't happen, but thus far he's been able to stuff takedown attempts. So I really like Tyson Nam in this fight. At minus 115, it's not a bad bet to put your money on him. When I look at this fight from a DFS perspective, well, Tyson Nam is priced down at 7,600, and it is very hard for me to find a fighter in the mid to low 7,000s that I like more than Nam. We already talked about Modafferi and Ed Herman. You have Brock Weaver, who I don't even think should be in the UFC. I will have no exposure to him. Anthony Ivy, he's kind of a tournament dart throw, does have heavy hands. I don't expect him to beat Barberena, though. Alan Patrick hasn't been very active, does have some good grappling skills, but tough opponent there against Bobby Green. It's going to be difficult for me to not have exposure to Tyson Nam. So I will definitely have a ton of exposure to him, and as a result of that, I won't have a ton of exposure to Matt Schnell, because I think Schnell's path to victory is by submission, and until I see Nam get taken down and subbed, in the UFC, I can't expect that to be a likely outcome. He's never been submitted in his professional career. So, and he's fought guys that will take fights to the ground, like Ali Bagatinov, for example. Right? He's got a victory over him in Fight Nights Global. So I really like Tyson Nam here. I'd be comfortable betting some money on him, and I'm going to have a ton of exposure to him in DFS. So we'll move on to the next fight here on the prelims, which is Julia Avila versus Sijara Eubanks. Eubanks was supposed to fight 2 weeks ago, and Avila was supposed to fight a few weeks ago as well. Both of their opponents dropped out of those fights, and the UFC has decided to pair them up in this one. We'll start with the Raging Panda, Avila, who's 8-1, and she's on a nice little streak here of 4 victories in a row, 2 of which have been in the UFC. 3 months ago, she knocked out Gina Mazzani. Her first fight, she beat Pansy Kianzad. She's looked really, really good so far in the UFC. For Sarge, she is 3-2 in her 5 most recent UFC fights. Victories over Lauren Murphy, Roxanne Modafferi, and most recently Sarah Morris. She did have losses to Betch Kohea and Aspen Ladd. Let's talk about Sijara Eubanks here, right? We know what her style of fighting is. She's going to try to get in the clinch, close the distance, take the fight to the ground. She was able to do that against Lauren Murphy. She was able to do that against Sarah Morris. She wasn't able to do that against Aspen Ladd, a bigger fighter. She wasn't able to really do that until very late in the fight against Betch Kohea. And Betch Kohea is not the biggest fighter, but she is pretty thick for that bantamweight division. The thing is, Julia Avila has a 3-inch height advantage, 2-inch reach advantage, and if she's able to control the distance in this fight, she should be able to pick Sarge apart standing. And I expect that to happen, and Vegas would certainly agree with me, because if you look at the odds, Avila is minus 290, Sarge is plus 245. The thing with Sarge is she does have a pretty strong chin. She's not an easy out. And again, I want to look at some numbers here. Julia Avila has been taken down. She's 66% takedown defense. It's a solid number. This is a dangerous fight, because if Eubanks does get this to the ground, that's where she'll have an edge with those strikes over top. Avila is a striker by trade. So it's not like Sarge is going to have to worry too much about this fight going to the ground and getting subbed. So, this is your classic striker versus grappler matchup here. And solid takedown defense numbers from Avila. A huge edge in the striking for Avila, and the size advantage leads me to believe that Avila will win this fight. Sarge is a tough out, so this isn't one that I want to bet on, but I am definitely leaning Avila. When it comes to DraftKings, Avila is priced up. She's the priciest fighter at 9,400. Now, she does have finishes on her resume, and she's a blue chip prospect for the UFC here in the bantamweight division. And if she was able to go out and finish Sarge Eubanks, that would be pretty impressive. I don't know if we'll see it, though. Sarge is just tough. She's got a good chin, man. The other thing with Sarge is her gas tank is always going to be something that we have to take into consideration, because she is one to gas out, and it makes sense because she is going to shoot for a bunch of takedowns. Sarge's takedown accuracy, 50% though, is pretty solid. I will say that. So DFS, Julia Avila, will she be a pivot this week? She might be. I mean, I don't know. I haven't looked at ownership projections, really, because at this point, with the way the UFC cards have gone, things have just constantly changed on a dime. It's not really worth looking at until a little bit closer to the start of the card. But Avila could be a decent pivot play in tournaments, but I'm not going to have a ton of exposure to her just because she's priced up, and I know she gets a lot of finishes, but Sarge is a tough out. For Eubanks, 6,800, the cheapest fighter on the card. She is a solid tournament play because if she lands that takedown, you're going to get some points there. She'll land some significant strikes. You know, she lands most of her strikes when she's in that top position, and she's priced down as the cheapest fighter. I will probably have more Eubanks exposure than Avila, even though I think Avila wins the fight. Because if you're playing these tournaments, you know, someone like Eubanks could be who you need to kind of break the slate. Neither of these guys will be in like my optimal lineup, but maybe a little bit of Eubanks sprinkled in, not too much of Avila. We'll see when this card ultimately shapes up if that gets changed at all. Move on to the next fight on the prelims here, which should be a really good fight between Roosevelt Roberts and Matt Frivola. We'll start with Roosevelt Roberts, 10-2, was looking like a monster until his most recent fight 3 months ago against Jim Miller, when he was subbed really early on in the first round of that fight. Armbar, just a crafty veteran move by Jim Miller. But before that, had victories over Alexander Yakovlev, and he subbed Brock Weaver. He also has a victory over Thomas Gifford, another guy who's not even in the UFC any longer. His only other loss came to Vince Pichel, crafty veteran, tough guy to get out of the octagon. For Matt Frivola, he's looked really good in the UFC, another guy that has come from the Contender Series. His only loss, he was knocked out to Pollo Reyes, which is a little bit concerning. But he has victories over Jalen Turner, Luis Pena, and then he went the distance, and it was a draw against Lando Venata. So we've seen Matt Frivola, he's been pretty successful against strikers thus far in the UFC, and he's fought opponents that have similar body types to Roosevelt Roberts in Luis Pena and Jalen Turner in his two most recent fights, which I love to see that because, Roosevelt Roberts is going to have a big size advantage here. I mean, he's 6'2" with a 73-inch reach. Frivola's only 5'9" with a 71-inch reach. So generally that's something I'd be a little bit concerned about. But Frivola has really done well against long, lanky fighters in the UFC thus far. And one of the reasons for that is because of his wrestling background. And I want to take a look at some of those stats, specifically the grappling stats. Frivola, 3.3 takedowns per 15 minutes, 40% takedown accuracy, 75% takedown defense. Roosevelt Roberts does have a solid 57% takedown accuracy, 58% takedown defense. So I think Roberts, he's a well-rounded fighter. He's got good striking. He doesn't have the heaviest hands. He's got really good jiu-jitsu skills. And again, I think his length really helps him with that. The problem here with Roberts is that 58% takedown defense, though it's not horrible, it scares me because I think Frivola is going to keep his wrestling in his back pocket. I wouldn't be surprised if Frivola started off the fight trying to get a read on Roberts, striking, and eventually shoot in for that takedown. And I expect that to happen here quite often. So if I'm betting this fight, I really like Frivola as a dog here at minus 105. Roberts is minus 115. Roberts is always a threat for a submission, but Frivola has never been subbed in his professional career. So, we could see it here. I don't think it's going to happen. So I'm confident that Frivola gets the victory here. When it comes to DFS, I love Frivola at 7,800. We already talked about how some of your options in the mid to low 7,000s aren't great this week. I talked about how I like Nam at 7,600. I also like Frivola a lot at 7,800 as well. I'll have a lot of exposure to him. He put up 77 points with 4 takedowns against Pena, 97 points against Turner. Again, 4 takedowns. Also had some nice reverses in that fight as well. I think we'll see more of the same. I won't have a ton of exposure to Roosevelt Roberts, but at 8,400, that's not a bad price point for him because he is a guy that can go out and hunt for the finish. So this is a fight that I expect to be pretty action-packed, and you do want to have exposure to it in DFS. So maybe I'll have some Roosevelt Roberts sprinkled in, but for the most part, I will be leaning at Frivola 7,800. I think that's a really good price point on this card. Move on to the next prelim here, which is a fight happening in the lightweight division between Alan Patrick and Bobby Green. We haven't seen Alan Patrick in quite a while. His most recent fight was 2 years ago where he was knocked out by Scott Hot Sauce Holtzman. Holtzman's a solid fighter, but he's not really known for finishing his opponents. Patrick has a pretty nice record though, 15-2. He's a guy that is 3-2 in his 5 most recent fights in the UFC, but again, he hasn't fought in 2 years. He has victories over Damir Hadzovic, Stevie Ray, Damian Brown, so solid opponents. His losses came to Mairbek, Taisimov, and as I mentioned, Scott Holtzman. On the flip side for Bobby Green, Lando Venata got a victory over him in that rematch. That took place just a month ago. Had a victory over Clay Guida. Also had victory over Eric Koch. He's also 3-2 in his 5 most recent UFC fights. Those losses came to Drakkar Klose and Francisco Trinaldo. We know what Bobby Green is. He's a boxer by trade. Fights very similar to Nick Diaz. He trains with them, has a similar style, wants to keep it striking. He's a long fighter. But this is a fight where he's not going to have a size advantage. Alan Patrick is actually an inch taller and has a 3-inch reach advantage. The thing with Bobby Green is he's pretty tricky to get on the mat. And even when you do get him on the mat, he's a guy that can pop right back up, man. He's great at using the cage and getting back to his feet. 73% takedown defense, and that's a number I want to focus on because I think if Alan Patrick has an advantage in this fight, it would be in his grappling. 40% takedown accuracy and 3.92 takedowns per 15 minutes. Alan Patrick is not a high volume striker. 1.88 strikes landed per minute. That number is very low. I think Bobby Green, as long as he can keep this fight standing, should win this fight. The thing is, Bobby Green's not much of a finisher. He's a super durable fight. This is a fight I expect to go the distance. I lean Bobby Green here. The odds suggest that Bobby Green should win this fight as well at minus 255. I don't know if I'd put a ton of money on him, just because if Patrick can get this fight to the ground, he will have an advantage there. But I can't back a fighter that I haven't seen fight in 2 years, and a fighter that was finished, knocked out by Scott Holtzman. That's nothing against Holtzman. I think he's a great fighter. He's just not the most heavy-handed striker. When it comes to DraftKings DFS, Bobby Green is priced up at $9,100. I don't love that salary. He's a guy that can, he throws a lot of significant strikes, over 5 per 15 minutes. So he can put up points. He put up 125 against Venata, 83 against Guida, 101 against Koch. I mean, he's always, because he can land those significant strikes, his floor is very high, right? Like, I would expect at least 50 points from Bobby Green. What scares me, though, is if he isn't able to finish this fight, and if Patrick does turn it into a sloppy grappling fest, I don't know if Bobby Green's going to score up to that 9,100 price point. So I don't think I'll have a ton of exposure to Bobby Green. And I don't think I'll have a ton of exposure to Patrick either at 7,100. But I did mention earlier he's not a bad dart throw. I don't think there's going to be a ton of exposure to Patrick because Bobby Green's takedown defense is good and because we haven't seen Patrick in 2 years. So again, this is kind of like the Sarge fight for me where I'd probably have a little bit more exposure to Patrick than Green, but this isn't a fight that I'm necessarily targeting. So we'll move on to the next fight here on the prelims, which is a fight between Frank Camacho and Brock Weaver, which is probably the fight that I'm least excited about. I mean, Frank Camacho is 1-4 in his 5 most recent UFC fights, and he took his opponent took a super short notice fight the last time we saw Camacho out there, Justin James, and he went up a weight division and he starched Camacho. Camacho was knocked out early in the first round there. He also was subbed by Beneil Dariush, head kicked by Jeff Neal, lost the fight to Drew Dober. His most recent victory came all the way back, it's been about a year and a few months now, to Nick Hein. And that one just, he was able to finish Hein. Hein's not a great fighter. I don't know. I don't love Frank Camacho. On the flip side, Brock Weaver, 15-5. This is a guy that made it to the UFC after a pretty solid fight on the Contender Series, but he has just looked awful in the UFC thus far. He does have a UFC victory, but it came via disqualification. It was an illegal knee that Rodrigo Vargas threw when Weaver was on the ground. And then he was subbed by Roosevelt Roberts 3 months ago. I don't think Brock Weaver is good enough in any areas to be UFC level comp fighter. He's not a good striker. He's not a good grappler. He's a persistent grappler. Like, he's going to try to get this fight in the clinch. He's going to try his best to take you down, but his wrestling is just not pretty. He has trouble taking fighters to the ground. I want to just look at the stats. Brock Weaver, 0% takedown accuracy, which is just absolutely awful. And Frank Camacho's 72% takedown defense. I don't see him getting this fight to the mat, which means it's going to have to stay standing, where Camacho should have an edge as long as his chin holds up. Now, Camacho is a pretty high volume striker, 6.67 strikes landed per minute, solid number. I don't know. I'm not picking in this fight. If I had to lean one way or the other, I'd lean Frank Camacho, but it's just not a fight I'm comfortable betting because I don't think either of these fighters are particularly good. And with that being said, when it comes to DFS, this is just a fight I'm avoiding. If you're going to diversify your lineups, you could have Frank Camacho in there. I mean, he's due for a victory, and he does throw with a lot of volume. As long as he doesn't get clipped, like in the Hein fight, 100 significant strikes, Dober 106, Brown 154. So, he's a guy that, as long as he remains competitive and can stay in the octagon, he can put up 100 points very easily. But he's just been such a wild card as of late, and I don't know how we'll see him. It's a pretty quick turnaround, since he was knocked out by Justin James 3 months ago. Brock Weaver, just 7 points against Roosevelt Roberts and basically 3 points against Vargas, right? I mean, he ended up scoring 93 because he won in the first round via DQ, but wasn't because of anything that he did. So I will have zero exposure to Brock Weaver. May have a little bit of Camacho here and there. Next card on the prelims is a fight taking place in the flyweight division versus Sabina Mazo and Justine Kish. This is another fight that I'm not really looking forward to too much. Sabina Mazo is 2-1 in the UFC. She's got victories over Shanna Dobson and JJ Aldrich. Both of them went the distance. In her first fight against Marina Moroz, she lost that one. It's another one that went the distance. For Justina Kish, another decision merchant. 3-2 in the UFC in her 5 most recent fights. Victories over Lucy Pudilova, Ashley Yoder, and Nina Antsarov, which is crazy to me that she has a victory over Antsarov. But her losses came to Ji-Yeon Kim and Felice Herrig. Maso's a big favorite in this one. She is minus 245. Kish is plus 205. Both these girls are strikers. They're going to prefer to keep this fight standing. I guess I give the edge to Sabina Mazo. She's a little bit of a bigger fighter. She's going to have a 5 to 6 inch reach advantage. So if she uses that to her advantage, she should be able to pick apart Justine Kish. But I'm not confident with that analysis. Justine Kish, I mean, this is a fight that's going to go the distance, and you just never know how these judges are going to score it. I just would stay away from it, I guess is what it would come down to. But if I go on Tapology, 86% of the public is on Mazo, and that makes sense to me. In DFS, Mazo is priced up at 9,200, which is absolutely crazy to pay 9,200 for a fighter that I don't think has a ton of finishing ability. She'll land a ton of strikes. She's the ultimate pivot play this week, but I won't have any exposure. For Justine Kish, 7,000. She's not horrible, because if this turns into a back and forth striking match, she could land 75, 90 significant strikes, and you're going to score 45, 50 points. But again, unless you're going to go really top heavy with your lineup, probably don't need a fighter priced down at 7,000. And I don't think this slate requires you to go top heavy, because the top heavy, the highest priced fighters I don't love really outside of Quarantillo. So you could have a little bit of Kish, but it's just a fight that I'm avoiding, is really what it comes down to. So we'll move on to, actually, I believe that as of right now, that is the last fight on the card. Now, Tapology has a fight between Alexander Romanov. How many times am I going to break down this guy? And Roque Martinez, who would be making his UFC debut, fighting out of Guam. There's been, I don't know if that's a confirmed fight at this point, and I'm not getting salaries yet in DFS, but if that fight does end up materializing, I love Romanov again. He's going to have a size advantage. He's a guy that just fights super aggressive, always goes for the finish, and Martinez has been finished. 15-5 record. He was finished by Mirko Filipovic. He lost the fight in Ryzen to Jake Hune. I think Romanov will have an advantage in that fight. So if that fight happens, there's a little bonus breakdown. And I would expect Romanov to be a pretty big favorite. Probably somewhere in the minus 250 to minus 300 range. So we'll move on to the last segment, our money-making segment here, which is my ideal lineup. And we'll start with the priciest fighter in that lineup, which is Billy Quarantillo at 9,300. Then Mike Rodriguez at 8,800, which he'll be subbed out. If Romanov's on this card, I'm gonna sub out Rodriguez for Romanov. Then Kama Worthy at 8,500, Michelle Waterson at 8,000, Matt Frivola at 7,800, and Tyson Nam at 7,600. As you can see, I'm really going with a lot of mid-range fighters this week. And I've been hot, so let's keep it rolling, man. Let's keep this streak going. I really like this lineup. I'm pretty confident in it. If you want to sub out Waterson and plug in Angela Hill because you feel more comfortable with her, you certainly can. Because again, I'm going to have a lot of exposure to both those fighters, and I'll even have some lineups where I have them stacked. So Quarantillo, Rodriguez, Worthy, Waterson, Frivola, Nam. Let's get that money. Let's make that cash. And if you're a big fan of the NFL, I will be breaking down some DFS for week 1 as well. Tune in to that. Like, subscribe. Appreciate you guys.